Hello, everyone. This is the March webinar presented by the Essex County branch of Ontario Ancestors. My name is Linda Urquhart, and I'll be your host for tonight. For those who are first-time visitors to our webinars, we are one of the 35 branches or special interest groups of Ontario Ancestors, also known as the Ontario Genealogical Society, which is the largest member-supported genealogical organization in Canada. It was founded in 1961 with its mission to encourage, bring together, and assist those interested in the pursuit of family history and to preserve Ontario's genealogical heritage. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home, including the first inhabitants of Essex County, the Anishinaabe group, part of the Three Fires Confederacy, comprising the bands Potawatomi, Ottawa, and Ojibwa, or Chippewa, as well as the Huron or Wendat or Wyandot bands. We must all acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and consider how we can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the warm weather we had on the weekend. It is getting a little chilly and a little wet here in Windsor right now, but spring is just around the corner. Just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded and it will be added to our YouTube channel. Also, questions will be answered following each presentation. Just add any questions as we go along to the chat box, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. We will be adding a handout to the chat box during the presentation. All of the links presented today are listed on the handout. Here are the links that we show every webinar, but it is useful to visit them periodically as new things are added all the time. Feel free to take a screenshot. The first link is to our parent organization, Ontario's Ancestors, where you will find many Ontario resources. Just add your ancestor's name to the search bar and see what you find. Next is a link to the Essex branch website, which has Essex County resources, including our members library, which is packed full of local resources. Other links include our YouTube channel, where you can review past presentation. And we always encourage you to interact with us by joining our Facebook group and following us on Twitter and Instagram. We also wanted to remind everyone about a special presentation being hosted by the Kent branch of Ontario Ancestors, open to everyone. It is a Family Tree Maker live chat for those who already use Family Tree Maker software to record their family history, but also for those just interested in hearing what the Family Tree Maker can do for you. So bring your questions on Tuesday, March 29th at 7 p.m. You can find the link to register for this session on the Essex branch of the Ontario Ancestors website. And here are some upcoming webinars from other branches of Ontario Ancestors. Tomorrow night, Lambton is presenting Researching Scotland. On Friday, the Kent branch offers Drop In to the Wallaceburg Museum. Next Saturday, the Irish Special Interest Group presents the Irish Palatines in Ireland and Canada. And on the 18th, the Niagara branch is having a special presentation by Mags Galden concerning what we release to and get back from our DNA data out in the world. And don't forget the Family Tree Maker live chat on the 29th. For other webinars, check out the event calendar at the Ontario Ancestors website. You can find it under the Education tab. And just another reminder to save the date for the Ontario Ancestors Conference 2022, which will again be virtual. The theme of the conference is the past, the present, and the future. It will be hosted by the Ottawa branch on June 24th to the 26th. Our next webinar is back on our regular night on Tuesday, April the 12th, where Deborah Honor will present what she learned about genealogy during the COVID lockdown. I am sure that we all had new experiences with our family research while we were hunkered down safely in our homes. Before we start our presentations tonight, we wanted to remind everyone about some of the useful resources that you can view online to assist in your own family research. All of the links shown in the next few slides are on the handout. Our digital world has very early Essex County newspapers digitized and available to search. The link to this site is inc.ourontario.ca. You can search for your ancestor's name and see if they were mentioned in any of these early local papers, including those in Windsor, Leamington, Essex, Kingsville, Amherstburg, Chatham, and Walkerville. Another very useful resource is the Canadian Counties Atlas Digital Project, housed at McGill University. You can search all the counties in Ontario to see where your ancestors' land was located in 1880. Our website also offers you the Essex County section of this County Atlas project. It's very interesting to see where your ancestors lived and who their neighbors were, or how far away was the church or the school or the cemetery. The commemorative biographical record for Essex County can be viewed at either archive.org or SWODA, the Southwest Ontario Digital Archives. This biographical record is a fantastic resource if your ancestor is included. I understand that you had to pay a fee to have your name included in this document, so unfortunately my poor farmer ancestors are not found. But if you are lucky enough to find your ancestor listed here, there's usually a lot of family history information that you may not find anywhere else. Speaking of SWOTA, there is a section called Windsor and Regional Publications, where many resources can be found. I've only named a few that I thought are of interest to genealogists, but there are many more listed on the handout. Thanks to a member of AIRS. Oh. Wait a minute. Sorry, I went to the wrong side. Speaking of SWOTA, there are many resources available to family researchers, such as the City of Windsor Directories, 1888 to 1970, the Essex County High School yearbooks, Essex County newspapers, which is the digital world link, the Ambassador yearbooks for Assumption University, as well as the University of Windsor for 1939 to 1979, and the Lance, the University of Windsor newspaper that goes from 1958 to 2019. Also on SWOTA, there is a section called the Windsor and Region Publications, where many resources can be found. I've only named a few here that I thought were of interest to genealogists, but there are many more listed on the handout. Thanks to a member of AIRS, they have posted the Alexander Bartlett diaries, as well as the James Bartlett Journal. Many local history books are listed here concerning Loyalist and Scotch settlements in 1783, the County of Essex in 1889, campaigns of the War of 1812 to 1814, Canadian Achievement, Volume 1, the Detroit River Region, the history of the town of Amherstburg, the Essex Historical Society papers, Fort Malden and the Old Fort Days, the Garden Gateway to Canada, 100 Years of Windsor and Essex County from 1854 to 1954. And new to this site is an interesting publication called Her Story, Lives of Women in the Detroit River Region. More Windsor and Region publications also on SWOTA include the history of the Weigel family, the Historical Atlas of Essex County, the John Askin papers that go from 1747 to 1820, histories of St. John's Church in Sandwich, histories of the town and township of Sandwich, the War on Detroit, Men of Achievement, records of the Western District Municipal Council, 1842 to 1890, and the history of All Saints Church through 90 years. The Essex branch website also has links to many public online resources. I don't know if you can see this clearly enough, but if you go to the resources tab, and that will open up, but then you can click on public resources. And there you will find links to some of the resources we have already discussed today, but many more free online resources are listed, resources that we have found useful in our research. These are also on the handout, and some of my favorites include Canadian Headstone, Family Search, Find a Grave, the Windsor Public Library Obituary Index for the Windsor Star, which is a fantastic resource, our Digital World and Google News Archives, and of course, SWOTA. In addition to these resources, we also give you links to the libraries, museums, and other organizations that you may find useful. Not all of them have their resources outlined, but you can visit these organizations to assist you in your research. Those that do include online information are the Amherstburg Freedom Museum, the French Canadian Heritage Society of Michigan, the Kent branch of Ontario Ancestors, the Marsh Collection, and of course, Ontario Ancestors. And lastly, we wanted to let you know that our featured resource on the website this month is the transcription of Green Hill Cemetery, located in Kingsville, established in 1911. It was transcribed by students in 1982, but then completed, verified, typed, proofread, and indexed by 22 volunteers of the branch and published in 1996. It has 262 pages, including the index at the end of the file. We will be changing this featured resource monthly to give you an idea of what you can find in the members library if you are a member of the Essex branch. And now for tonight's presentation, we're trying something new, a members medley, short presentations from 3 of our members who have Essex connections. Our presenters are Stephanie Stone, Kara Folleringa, and David Hewitt. Stephanie will start us off, so please put any questions you have in the chat box and we will answer them after each presenter. So I will now turn it over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Linda. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. Tonight, I'm going to talk about my family in Windsor, a brief look at their lives from the 1920s into the 1950s. And I guess I should just say that while I'm a member of Essex County branch of Ontario Ancestors, I live in Kingston and I belong to the Kingston branch as well. All my grandparents settled in Windsor in the 1920s. Here's me at the bottom, my Stone and Barton parents, my mom's parents, and my dad's parents. So you might notice that I have both Stone and Sansom in my family name. So I feel I was destined to be the family historian in my family. When I say my grandparents came to Windsor, they actually settled in Walkerville. You can see it, hopefully here outlined in red on the map. It shows the city of Windsor, which lies south of Detroit, and its eastern edge extends to where Lake St. Clair empties into the Detroit River. I wanted to give a little outline of where this town of Walkerville lies geographically. My family settled in Walkerville, which was then a separate town and then later amalgamated into the city of Windsor. In 1858, Hiram Walker, a whiskey distiller in Detroit, started to expand his business south of the river. This picture postcard shows Hiram Walker and Sons Limited in 1915. Walker built a model company town. There was a farm, a dairy, apple orchards, a blacksmith shop, housing for the workers, a church, a school, an opera house, shops, and a library. Walker funded a police force, paved the streets, and installed electric lights and clean running water, long before the rest of Windsor. By 1931, the population of Walkerville was about 10,000 people. Another large business enterprise was the Ford Motor Company of Canada, established in 1904 and located just east of Hiram Walker's along the river. By 1913, it employed 1,400 workers. This was the vibrant urban environment that my grandparents emigrated to in the 1920s. The first to arrive in Canada was my mother's father, Frederick Barden, in March 1907. He was 22, single, and had grown up in East Grinstead, Sussex, south of London. We don't know why he left England, but he seemed to be a restless sort. He crossed the border to the United States many times and went back to England at least twice. He worked as a carpenter and joiner. This studio portrait shows him in East Grinstead in the early 1900s, perhaps just before he left for Canada. Now, what brought him to Windsor? I think it was the Grave family, who were friends from East Grinstead. If you saw the December Essex County branch newsletter, you may have seen this photo. It was one of the portraits that I submitted. It shows Mr. and Mrs. Grave at their daughter's wedding in 1937. The family lived at 270 Pillette Road, just south of Riverside Drive. You can see 270 just above the stairs. When he signed up for World War I in August 1915, Fred was working in Victoria, BC as a carpenter, also a bricklayer and horse groom. He served as a bombardier or gunner and returned to Canada in November 1919. His service record reports that he'd been blown up by a shell in 1917, possibly at Passchendaele, but the wounds were more psychological than physical. My mother's mother, Edith Sansom, was born in Birmingham, England in 1886. Her father and his brother ran a small pen nib manufacturing company, so the family was relatively well off. Her mother died when she was 3 years old, and she didn't get along with her stepmother. Her father himself died in 1900. She became a psychiatric nurse, working in workhouses in Birmingham, Croydon, Surrey, and London. When she left England in 1921, she was 35, single, and going to a friend on Hubbard Street in Detroit. We don't know why she left, but she may have wanted a fresh start. This photo was taken probably around 1920 or 21, just before she left England. My grandparents married in Windsor in 1923. They settled near Pontiac, Michigan, where Fred had bought a stable. This photo shows him holding my mother, who was born in 1924. It must have been taken at the stable when you look at the setting and his riding gear. His venture, however, failed and the family moved to Windsor. They rented various places in Ford City and later in Walkerville. Esdras Place, Ford Boulevard, Windermere Road, Lincoln Road. In 1951, Edith bought a house on Shepherd Street East and then on Wellesley Avenue. Fred got a job at Ford's, but in 1929, he was laid off. This was, of course, the beginning of the Great Depression. In 1931, he tried to commit suicide. He survived and was admitted to the Veterans Wing of Westminster Hospital in London, Ontario. He was diagnosed with melancholia, what we now call schizophrenia. The longest time the Bardens lived anywhere was in the Seneca Apartments at 1636 Seneca Street, next to Stodgel Park and near the corner of Lincoln Road. This photo shows the Seneca Apartments in December 2008. They lived on Fred's veterans pension. It varied from $70 to $80 a month, converted from 1932 money that reckons to $1,300 to $1,500 today. For Edith to go out to work would have been a disgrace. The family was poor, but many families at the time were poor. My mother thought the Graves were rich because they owned a car. It was a very English milieu. Her mother's friends were all immigrants, Irish or English. They felt they were entitled to everything because they were British. Everyone else were foreigners. In fact, she didn't meet anyone from a non-English family until she went to high school. A very different environment from today. This photo shows Christmas Day with the Grave family in 1939. My grandmother is 53, my Uncle John is 9, and my mother is 15. The kids would spend Saturday afternoons at the movies. There were softball games in Stodgel Park next door and outings to local beaches. My grandmother was expert in all sorts of handiwork, knitting, crochet, embroidery, sewing. In this 1955 photo, she would have sewed our dresses and smocked them. I'm sure this expertise was typical of her generation. She was also an accomplished pianist. She enjoyed playing cards with friends and helping look after her grandchildren. She died in May 1960. Fred himself died later that year, ironically, since he had been a veteran, on November 11th, almost 30 years after having been admitted to hospital. They're both buried in Victoria Memorial Cemetery, which is located on Highway 3, just east of Windsor. My mother, Frances Barden, was born in 1924 while the family was living near Pontiac, Michigan. After the family moved to Windsor, she attended Edith Cavell School in Riverside, King Edward School in Walkerville, and Windsor Walkerville Vocational School. She didn't want to go there, but her mother argued that it would give her a better chance of a job. She left school at 16 to go to work. This was 1940. For some reason, she was fired from her first job. Then she went to work at Hiram Walker and Sons. And this photo shows her standing in front of the lovely old distillery building along Riverside Drive at Hiram Walker's in 1941 or 42. But after a year there, her boss died. So she joined the Royal Canadian Air Force Women's Division. This would have been 1942. We have to think that the war provided a great number of jobs for women as well as men. She spent 4 years as an accounts clerk and doing the paperwork for returning airmen. She reached the rank of sergeant. She worked in Ottawa and Fingal, Ontario, and at the Canadian Joint Staff Mission at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, DC. This photo was likely taken when she was in Washington because you can see the USA flash on her sleeve. Now I'm going to turn to the Stone side of my family and take a quick drink of water. Just a moment. My father's father, Alfred Stone, was born in 1862 in Birmingham, England, the son of a successful carpenter and joiner. He became a carpenter himself. He married in 1885 and had 5 children. This studio portrait was possibly taken for his wedding. Unfortunately, his wife died when the youngest child was just 6. He married my grandmother a few years later in 1909, when he was 47 years old. He was 13 years older than his new wife. My father's mother was Nellie Long, born in 1875 in Windsor, a little southwest of London. When she was 17, her mother died and the father deserted the family. There were 7 children. She moved to Birmingham and became a Sunday school teacher. She was teaching my grandfather's youngest children when they met. This is their wedding photo taken in 1909. They had 2 sons. So what brought the Stones to Windsor? We don't know for sure, but there may have been a desire to emigrate. Alfred's 3 sons from his first marriage had all died. 2 were killed in World War I and the 3rd died in 1919. Also, England had just been through a depression, but my father believed that his mother's brother persuaded the family to emigrate. And in the photo, the photo shows 5 of the Long siblings. And I figure it was about 1923. My grandmother sits on the right-hand side and her brother Will is standing at the back. Yes, okay, so my father believed that Will, his mother's brother, persuaded the family to emigrate. Will had come to Canada as a home child and fought for Canada in the war. He probably thought that there was more of a future here. Alfred left England in 1923, accompanied by Will. Nellie and the 2 boys joined him the following year. In letters home, Alfred talked about how all the houses in Windsor had verandas. My father wondered what the heck verandas were. The family settled in Walkerville, renting first on Lincoln Road, then Marintet Avenue and Pierre Avenue. Alfred worked at any carpentry jobs he could find, but it was a struggle. For example, he worked at Hiram Walker's for 2 years for $100 a month, about $1,600 today, but was laid off during the Depression. He also helped paint the Ambassador Bridge, which is shown in this postcard here. The bridge opened in 1929. Alfred was now in his early 60s, so his age might have affected his work prospects. Another job was helping to build Ottawa United Church on Lincoln Road in 1925. Alfred heard about a little house that was being built for the caretaker. He got the job of caretaker, but really it was my grandmother who did. The only recompense was the rent on the house, but it was a tremendous help at the time. The family lived there for over 20 years. And this is a photo of the church before it was expanded in 1975 and renamed Emmanuel United Church. My father remembers him and his brother dusting the church every Saturday. Nellie seemed to be a mover and shaker and was very involved in the church and its social activities. She taught Sunday school, sang in the church choir, organized meetings of the Women's Association, and hosted socials and teas. This photo shows the couple, my grandparents, celebrating the 35th wedding anniversary in 1944. I was able to identify this photo from a 1944 article in the Windsor Star, which mentioned the 3-tiered cake and the red roses on the left, just behind the candlesticks, a gift from my father in England, where he was serving in the war. When they died some years later, my grandparents were buried in Windsor Grove Cemetery, located at the corner of Giles Boulevard and Howard Avenue in central Windsor. This is another photo from that event. I wanted to show how sumptuous the decorations were at that time. We'd consider this over the top now, but it was probably not unusual at the time. People were very involved in their church, and a lot of effort would have gone into holding an event of this kind. There were apparently over 100 guests. When I first saw this photo, I was surprised to see my grandmother Edith at the far right. But the Windsor Star article mentioned that, and I quote, Mrs. E. Barden played the Lohengrin wedding music as Mr. and Mrs. Stone entered. My father, Raymond Stone, was born in Birmingham and was 8 years old when he arrived in Windsor. He attended Prince Edward School, what is now John Campbell School, King George Public School, Hugh Beaton, and Walkerville Collegiate. As a boy, he was crazy about airplanes and idolized Charles Lindbergh. He and his brother walked all the way to Windsor Airport for its opening in 1927. They were also members of the Model Airplane Club at the YMCA. After graduating from high school, he got a job in the mailroom at Chrysler's. He then joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1942 and trained as a navigator. He was seconded to the Royal Air Force, to a squadron that was part of the Special Operations Executive. They dropped supplies to the French resistance behind the German lines. He said it was the best time of his life. And that's my father's flight crew, or at least 5 of them. Some photos show 7, but my father is sitting on the left. Just before my father left for his RCAF training in 1942, he met my mother. He was good friends with Ken Saltmarsh, who became the first curator of the Windsor Art Gallery. Ken lived in the Seneca Apartments below the Bardens, and Ken introduced them. After the war, my father went back to Chrysler's and worked in the ordering department at the truck plant. My parents got married in 1948 at St. Mary's Anglican Church. They settled a little north of Amherstburg and raised 5 children. We were all born at Metropolitan General Hospital in Windsor. They moved into a house that my father had bought in 1947 on Front Road North, or County Road 20. It's about 25 kilometers south of Windsor and 4 kilometers north of Amherstburg along the Detroit River. It had been built by Thomas Olette, a local lumber baron, in 1882. Olette is a prominent name in Windsor. By the time my father bought the house, it was very run down, but he and his brother fixed it up. It was a lifelong project. My father was always fixing something, painting the exterior, etc. My parents lived the rest of their lives there, and all of us children grew up there. That's all I want to really say about my generation, except that of the 5 of us, 2 live in Windsor, 1 lives in Essex, 1 is in Calgary, and I'm in Kingston. Thanks very much. And now, does anyone have any questions?
Stephanie, this is Pat, and I've had a couple questions come in. The first one, have you had any success tracing your grandparents in immigration records since they all came later?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I've had lots of success finding them in passenger lists, landing cards, crossing the border between Canada and the United States. Records have been available at Library and Archives Canada for many years, and any organization like Ancestry and Family Search have records as well.
Yes, I think they're indicating that since so many of us have ancestors that came early in the 19th century or even later, so we're not as fortunate in having those kinds of records.
Yes, I was very fortunate in that way.
Yeah. And someone said, did you or your sister inherit Edith's skill of handiwork? They noticed.
Well, there were 3 of us girls, and we all learned to sew, and we all sewed a lot, as did my mother. We all learned to knit and crochet at school and have kept that up to some extent, all of us. But I never learned to smock or to embroider the way my grandmother did.
Yes. Have you been to England to visit where your grandparents came from?
Yes, I've gone a number of times because we do have relatives still in England, although the relationship was never close. My parents didn't keep in very good touch, but I've been to Birmingham a number of times to do research, and I've developed friends who live there. I found a cousin who lived nearby, actually 2 cousins. And I've been down to, actually, I spent a few nights, maybe in 1997, in East Grinstead. I had been doing research in London and decided I would spend a few days in East Grinstead, and I photographed all the houses they lived in, and in fact rented, got a room at a bed and breakfast that was just a stone's throw away from one of the houses that my grandfather had grown up in. So it was really exciting.
Yes, it would be very special. Someone says, my great-grandfather came to Canada in 1907 as well and worked in Walkerville. Did they come on the ship Virginian? Do you know what ship you're
I can't say offhand, but in fact, I was just looking at the passenger list and immigration records this afternoon, and the Virginian doesn't ring a bell. It was March 1907 when my grandfather came. It might have been the Tunisian, but I really couldn't say for sure.
No,
but that's quite a coincidence.
Is the house in Amherstburg still there? A couple people that.
Yes, and I was tempted to include later photographs, but I wanted to end my presentation somewhere, and so the 1950s was just where it ended up. Yes, it's still there, and my father sold it in the year 2000, and the couple who bought it, who had been living in Windsor, excuse me, had a lot of money and they fixed it up, and they were finally able to get it historically designated. So yes, it's still there.
Oh, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and no other questions, but we've had several comments saying excellent presentation, great presentation.
Oh,
thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, we can pass it on then to Kara.
Give me 1 second, I'll share my screen. Okay, good evening. My name is Kara, and I'm excited to be here tonight to talk a bit about my family and some of my genealogy research. For a bit of a background about myself, I'm still relatively new to genealogy. I've been a member of the OGS for 2 years, and I've really loved being a member. I feel like I've learned a lot, even just from being in the Essex branch Facebook group. I've learned quite a bit. I'm also working on a master's degree in library and information studies from the University of Alberta, and I am a collections assistant at the Marsh Historical Collection in Amherstburg. So research, and specifically historical research, are right up my alley and probably why I fell in love with genealogy so much. Okay, so jumping into my family, my focus tonight is going to be on my maternal side, as that's where my Essex County connections are. I'm going to bounce around my family tree a bit and highlight some of the interesting people or stories that I found. So you might not get a full picture of my family tree, but pictured here are my maternal grandparents, David Drewlard and Janet Szymanski. On the right is a picture of them with my parents and myself and one of my sisters. And on the left is a newspaper clipping from the Windsor Star. It's their marriage announcement. I obtained this from newspapers.com, and I know that our next presenter is going to talk more about newspapers, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but I'll just quickly say that newspapers.com is such an excellent resource for the Windsor, Detroit area, and it's a great place to check out. All right, so I'm not going to talk too much about the Szymanskis tonight, but I'll just briefly talk about them a bit. So these are my great-grandparents, Irene Burse and Stanley Szymanski. Irene Burse, her family were longtime farmers. So the Burse family, they were a pioneering family in the GTA area, and then future descendants went to Tilbury and farmed there. And eventually her father was a farmer. His name was Walter, and he farmed around the Holy Names High School area. So Stanley Szymanski, his parents were economic immigrants from Poland, and eventually their parents, so his grandparents, came to live in Windsor as well. Beyond when they arrived in Canada, I've hit a bit of a brick wall, in that all the records that I've been able to find are in Polish. If anybody else has done any Polish genealogy research and has any insights on how to better translate than Google Translate, I would love to chat more about that. But I shared a book here, and it's called 1 Century of the Polish Community in Windsor from 1908 to 2008. And I just want to say briefly, when I'm doing my research, one of the things I try to look for are anything that helps contextualize my ancestor stories to learn more about who they were and what they did. And this book definitely helped with my Polish family. What I've learned is, through this book, a lot of the Polish community's life centered around the church. And in Windsor, that was the Holy Trinity Church. It's on Ellis Street. And I found even in my family, a lot of their addresses were within walking distance of the church. You could even see it from their front door. So it's definitely true for the Polish community in Windsor that the church was very important to them. All right, so I'll go back to the Drewlard side now. Before I get into it, I wanted to briefly mention a website called Know Your Kin. If anybody else has any Drewlard connections, it's really worth checking out. I believe that it was created by the French Society in Windsor. It goes into great detail for each person. There are newspaper clippings, images, and links to substantiate each piece of information, which I find very helpful, because sometimes when you're on Ancestry looking at somebody else's tree, it's hard to figure out what's true and not true, but not with this website. There's links right there, so you know that it's accurate. But the family member I wanted to talk about first was Simon Drewlard, or Simon Drewlard. He was one of the first Drewlards to land in the area. He was a voyageur. You can see him here on this map. It is from 1798. I took it from Hergé Lajeunesse book, The Windsor Border Region, and it shows some of the early land grants for the area. You can see the ribbon farming lots there. I haven't read this book in full, but the parts that I have read, it really seems to extensively cover the early history of the region, which is very valuable. I found It's interesting how his name is spelled here. You can see lot number 47. It's written how it would have sounded in French. So a little bit different. So Simon Drewlard ran an early grist mill in the area in land that now would be considered LaSalle, but it would have been Petite Côte. It was located near where Turkey Creek crosses Sprucewood in LaSalle. And there's a few books that talk about this grist mill. The first is Urge La Jeunesse's book, The Windsor Border Region. It goes over how it was established. But another book the town of LaSalle published a few years back called Grist for the Mill, and it was written by Herb Calling, and that talks about some of the grist mills in the area and actually all of Ontario. So I'm sure the town still has copies if anyone is interested in reading about that. So Simon Drewlard was an early ancestor, but I'm going to jump forward a few generations. These are my great-grandparents on the Drewlard side, Frederick Barden and Anastasia Ryan. So they met while serving in the war. Rick Drewlard was a soldier from Canada, and Anne Drewlard was a nurse with the Red Cross. So they were married overseas, and they started their family during the war. The family picture there, that's my grandfather in the middle, David Drewlard. There's a clipping underneath it there. I believe it's from Upsetting the Hourglass, that column in the Echo, but I took it from the Know Your Kin website, and it mentions how Rick Drewlard in 1943 wrote home and talked about how he married a lovely little Irish girl. I was fortunate to know my great-grandmother very well. Once they came back to Canada, they settled in Amherstburg, where Rick was from and his family was from. And she lived to 99 years old and stayed in the same house for most of that time. So I wrote a piece on war brides in the Amherstburg area for the fall 2021 newsletter for the Marsh Collection. All of the editions of the newsletter are available on the website. So if you have any connections to war brides in the area and would like to learn more, definitely take a look at that. So this story about how they met and how they started their family really hits home what I love about genealogy research. I think what drew me in is so much had to happen in the generations past to lead to each of us being here. There's so many struggles and so many impossible stories. And just looking at their story, they wouldn't have met if not for the war. And I think it's just incredible to learn about all these things that led to my existence. All right, so moving to the next family member. These are Frederick Drewlard's parents, Gilbert Drewlard and Mary Bernard. So thanks to the Marsh Collection, I was able to find this very clear picture of Gilbert, that was featured in the Echo. I'll put a bit of a plug in here for my workplace. We have so many pictures and genealogy files at the Marsh Collection. If you have any Amherstburg connections at all, it's definitely worth reaching out to us because you might be surprised at what we have. So Gilbert Drewlard, he was a barber at a shop on Murray Street with his brother. He did that until he died of the Spanish flu in 1918. Next to his picture is one of his wife, Mary Bernard, and I'm going to focus on her family for the rest of the presentation now. So her father's name was Antoine, and he ran a pretty lively hotel called the Dominion Hotel on the corner of George and Richmond Streets in Amherstburg. Here's an ad from 1875 pictured. So from what I've been able to glean about him from the Echo, he was a bit of a public figure at the time. And I've been able to learn a little bit about him and who he was. I discovered that he loved to serve muskrat at his hotel. I think it was mentioned earlier, the website Inc., where you can get the Echo and some other local papers digitized. It's definitely worth checking out because you can find out a lot about your ancestors that way. One thing to note about it is there's a few years of the Echo missing, and sometimes something might not be clear, but we have all of the microfilms and the originals at the Marsh Collection. So if you need help looking something up, definitely reach out to us. But this ad is a good example of some of the things you can find in there. All right, so Antoine's father, and he's the last person I'm going to talk about tonight. This is Jean-Baptiste Bernard. He was a soldier in the War of 1812. He was part of the 1st Essex Regiment and fought in the Battle of Detroit. Archives Canada has some of these records indexed. They're not digitized, but you're able to request them online, and I was able to get a few that way for Jean-Baptiste. One thing to note, if you decide to go down that route, is that because of COVID, there's quite a long wait time, so it took a while to get these files. But below his name there, you see part of that record, one of the ones I obtained. It showed his name on a list of veterans who received medals for their service. I also found this picture just below there. This was from Michael Gladstone White's book, War Drums Along the River. And it features some soldiers getting ready for battle. And what I find interesting is when I picture War of 1812 soldiers, I picture Fort Malden interpreters, I picture the red uniforms of British soldiers. But from what I'm learning, not all the soldiers had uniforms. The civilian soldiers who signed up, for the most part, wore what they had and they fought with what they had. So you could see in that picture, there's pitchforks and there's shovels. So the uniforms were reserved for the British soldiers, but the Canadians didn't have that. And so it's been interesting to kind of contextualize what his experience would have been as a War of 1812 soldier. Anyways, that's all that I had to share tonight. Here's a list of my references in case you were curious where anything I said came from. I really appreciate being asked to share. It's a joy to talk about my family and my research. If anyone would like to keep chatting, feel free to reach out or come and see me at the Marsh Collection. I'm there on Mondays and Thursdays, but someone's there every day from 10 to 4. So come on and stop by. Does anyone have any questions for me?
This is Pat. We don't have any questions, but we do have someone commented and certainly agree with the individual. You certainly have a very diverse ethnic background.
Mm-hmm.
And your comment about the importance of locating and adding context to your ancestors' lives through history books and newspapers is so very important.
Mm-hmm.
And another comment, great job, Kara. Have you reached out to the Eastern European SIG for translating?
No, I haven't. What was that name again?
The Eastern European Special Interest Group of Ontario Ancestors.
No, I'll have to look into that. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if they have a Facebook group or not, but
Yeah, it's interesting.
might be another idea.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there are no, are there any more, is that all the questions?
Yeah, just someone else said great job.
Okay, good, good. Okay, we'll pass it on to David then now.
Let's see.
Good evening. My name is Dave Hewitt, and I, unlike the other two presenters, don't have very deep roots in Essex County, as you will see. But I asked myself a question, and I said, if some of my ancestor 150 years from now came back to see what I was doing in Essex County, what would be their one of their places to go? And the Leamington Post and News was the answer. Newspapers have always been a part of my life. I delivered papers. I wrote for the Leamington Post, and today it's a rare day if I don't read at least 3 or 4 of them a day. And newspapers, especially the small town weeklies, are a window into the community. Pick up a weekly paper in any town, and in a few minutes you can find information about the local customs, the business community, the churches, how the local hockey team is faring. And this applies not only to the current editions of the paper, but to past editions. I came across this statement by C.N. Staley. She said, "We sometimes forget that our ancestors had flesh and bones and stories to tell. Our ancestors led lives just like us, only different. Using our life as an example, how can we parallel it to theirs? They ate and drank, married and had families, dressed, had trades and occupations, practiced religion, dabbled in the arts and sciences, participated in politics and economics. Placing our ancestors into the historical context and adding the personal details takes time, but it can be done. My wife is the genealogist in the family. She unearths the census records, looks through the city directories, collects the marriage, death, and birth records, and so on. When we go out to do genealogical research, I usually wind up in the newspaper morgue looking through back issues. And I'm never disappointed, even if I fail to find mention of them by name. I learn about what was going on in their lives and often find some amazing information. An example of that occurred in 1979, and I'm in the library at Croydon. My grandfather was from Croydon. And I came across this article in the Croydon Advertiser on November 6, 1880. It is called "The Chestnut Cellar and the Dog." And it tells the story of a man named James Hewitt, who was charged with being in unlawful possession of a dog. His wife, Mrs. Hewitt, testified that while selling chestnuts, a young man approached her husband saying he wanted to get rid of a dog. He agreed to accept the dog. The judge did not really believe her story and remanded her husband. And the next edition of the paper reported that a new witness had come forward and confirmed Mrs. Hewitt's story, and James Hewitt was released. My grandfather was born on November 5th, 1880, so if you do the math, his father was likely in jail when he was born. That's something that I've never heard of from my family members. So you can find interesting things like this. The source of the newspaper collection was the that I've used is the Inc. ODW newspaper collection, and the paper especially was the Leamington Post, which was the paper of record in Leamington from 1874 to 2012. You can see some of the places, newspapers that are represented in the collection, and I think the best thing about the collection is it's also free. So that's at least I haven't got a bill yet for using them. Here are some of the local papers of interest: the Amherstburg Echo, the Chatham Daily News, Essex Free Press, Kingsville Gazette. One that I found interested and took a side road down to read was the Voice of the Fugitive, which had a few editions in the 1850s, and of course the Windsor Star. Well, where do I start? I start with my mother and father. When they go through the Leamington Post, they would be able to find this. This is their 40th wedding anniversary announcement in the Leamington Post. That was on June 22nd, 1986. So they were married on June 22nd, 1946. They were married in Toronto. And they were going to have an open house on May 18th, and it was at 37 Noble Avenue, which is the house I grew up in. So you can find out about their marriage date and where they lived in Leamington. And these are the things that are in that announcement. Well, shortly after they arrived in Leamington in 1947, and shortly afterwards, I was born in 1948. You can see the announcement at the bottom, the misspelling, I don't say the variant spelling of my name. And I was born at Hopewell Hospital. I don't know if anyone remembers Hopewell Hospital, but it closed in the early 1950s. And I'm told I was born at about quarter to midnight, and I was either a little devil on Halloween or I was a little saint on All Saints Day. So I turned out to be the devil. But anyway, you notice the advertisement that was on the same page. And I ate a lot of baby food, Heinz baby food growing up, even as a teenager, and that we would have some of the chocolate puddings for dessert. My father took his position at Heinz. That's why he came to Leamington. And one of the things he did and throughout his career was to be a part of a team that built a new baby food line in the factory there. And I can remember going with him on a Saturday morning when he'd been called out because the line wasn't working the way it was supposed to be. Eventually the bugs got worked out. Well, I carry on now, and I'm not going to say a lot more, but what I want to take a look at is what would you find out? What was life like in the 50s, and what was going on in Leamington, what was going on in my life in the 1950s and 60s. And these are a series of slides to give you some idea of what was happening there. We can see a help wanted slide, two of them from the 1950s. An elderly lady is a companion in good home, and she's wanted. There's an ad for Raleigh men and a couple of ads for sharemen to grow early and late crops. And tomato peelers. I think that's probably a uniquely Leamington trade. I don't think you go somewhere else that you're going to find too much of a demand for that trade. But tomato peelers. There was a bus in Leamington in the 50s and 60s. I think I vaguely remember it, but that would take you from the Four Corners to the ends of the town. And this was the winter schedule for sometime in the 1950s. There was a going out of business sale in the 1950s. It was located, I think, on Chestnut Street in Marlborough, and which seems to me is a residential area when I was growing up, but there was a business there that was going out. There were music exams. The Royal Conservatory of Music had an examiner come to towns every year, and if I look down through that, my sister Karen is in that as one who had passed her exam that year in 1961. And these results were posted in the paper year by year too, so you could tell who was learning to play the piano. I had a couple of names there I recognize. I never knew they played the piano. There was a business of shopping, Christmas shopping in 1965. And you could pick out a present and pay for it on the layaway plan and pick it up in time for Christmas and save yourself a lot of last minute shopping, and also a pile of bills coming in after Christmas that we have. So they had the layaway plan, and some of us that are that age, we can remember that being advertised. We have the annual meeting of the Heinz Credit Union, and you can read in there the list of officers that were elected. There's also the describe how the credit union has grown, and now it's, I think, the Sun Parlor Credit Union. It was a merger of three credit unions somewhere back around in later part of the last 90s or so. Commencement. These were the posted in the paper. Your name and actually where you were going. You could look where it down there somewhere. I was posted in there, and I was it would announce that I was going off to the University of Guelph after my graduation. So we have everybody's name that graduated from that class. So if your ancestor went to high school, the local paper has probably a record of their graduation. The Leamington Fall Fair was an annual event, and the exhibitors and the prize list for the exhibitors is my sister Susan is in that one in 1964, I believe. Churches were a big part of the life of the community, and you can see the annual report of St. John's, meeting of St. John's Anglican Church in 1969, and the names of the officers in that church, and some of the business that was transacted there. In addition, auxiliaries, Catholic Women's League, ACW, Anglican Church Women, and UCW, United Church Women, had their minutes of their meetings reported in the paper too. So as has been said, the churches were a significant part of the life of many people, and these churches were their minutes and their business was recorded in the papers. Hockey rosters. These were the local minor hockey teams with all the names of the people that were selected. And actually, in 1970, I coached the Pee Wee hockey team there, so I'm listed as a coach. You can look down at the advertisement there and see the arena activities. You can see when the local junior hockey team plays, and when we went public skating and so forth, so that what was going on at the arena. The next one is the minor baseball, and this was an example of the column that I wrote. I covered minor baseball and minor hockey for a number of years while I was through in high school, and this was one of the columns that I wrote. And again, you see the arena activities. There's roller hockey at 8 p.m. on Sunday, and another variety of events. So things in the life of the community are recorded in these newspapers. And if you went to high school, there was column in the high school that was written by the students, and it was published. My sister Karen has written an item for that column, and they tell you about the life of the school. And if you had a relative that attended LDSS, then you could find out at least what was going on at that school, if not the details or their names. In the 1972, I left Leamington for Petrolia. I had a teaching job in Petrolia, and I left, but I didn't. The paper still continued to carry things about me and about my family, even though I was in Petrolia. There was the announcement of our wedding. Sheila and I were getting married July 7th, 1973, and it would be at Trinity United Church in Thunder Bay. And you have the parents of the bride and groom listed, and the bride's birth name is included, and her hometown and my hometown. We had birth announcements, the announcement of the birth of our daughter Olivia, and the announcement of our son James, the birth, and 1980 and 82, and the birth of one of our nephews who was born in Toronto. And that again tells you a little bit about the family, who the parents were, the grandparents, and and so on. Golf League. Season opens for the Ladies Golf League in 1980, and we have a report on the membership and how many have signed up and who the sponsors are. And other sports were covered equally. In the winter, there was, a lot of bowling scores that were recorded in the paper. So if you had an ancestor that was into bowling, you could look up and maybe find their scores, or likewise on the golf course. There was old timer hockey. My brother Bill plays in the old timer league and has played for a long time, and that's there. Political life. My father sat on the Public Utilities Commission, and just thank you for the people of Leamington for electing him to that position. And of course, there was the reports of the town council and the reports of the wider political movements as they affected the town too. There were transitions that you have. You can see my father transitioned from Hines to be a Leamington teacher at the high school. When he retired, he had taught driver ed at the high school, and he had his own driving school. We had some suggestions for him, like if you want a crash course in driving, call him, but he didn't bite at that. And there's my brother Bill that has an ad for his business too that he's had. School news, again in the Queen Elizabeth School, and the burning issue there at the Queen Elizabeth was, could they have a longer lunch hour? My nephew Eric suggested that he would love a longer lunch hour because they could have more fun and play more games and play longer. He wasn't too much into the books, I guess. And there was the player of the week for minor baseball or Nice. One of the things that newspapers and weeklies have too are the flashbacks from days gone by. These papers, one of them that you can see here is, I think, from about 1982. And I won a prize in an essay contest sponsored by the Ministerial Association. You look through those, and sometimes you find things that direct you back into earlier editions that you want to see. But this is always an interesting column for me to read when I return to Leamington and read the local paper. And there are surprises. Again, like the man with the dog, and there's the surprise that this was on the front page in January of 1980. My father being elected to the PUC, and I was being elected to the mayor of Petrolia. And that news, so it gave a little bit of information about myself there too. So there are surprises. In summary, I want to suggest that there may be three things that we need to remember. Spelling variants. Your name is often not spelled the way you spell it. And there are two examples in what I had. Some issues may be missing of the paper. One of my greatest athletic achievements occurred in March of 1959, and those editions are missing. So I won't even say it because I have no proof, but be prepared that there may be issues missing, and it takes time. It takes time to go through these papers and look, and it takes a lot of luck, I think, good fortune to find things. Anyway, I want to suggest one of the great pleasures of doing genealogical work is to go through the newspapers and find out what I can learn about the times and the places and my parents and ancestors had. If anybody wishes to comment or has suggestions, this is my email, and please feel free to contact me. Are there any questions?
Hi, this is Pat again. Just going back to the comments here. Someone commented, Cindy, that newspapers are a gold mine for family historians for sure. And if they aren't digitized and available online yet, it is worth the effort to go to the location that the local papers are held, and spend some time there looking at them, because they are a gold mine. Someone else says, are local newspaper offices a good source of their archives, or are your local libraries a better option? David, do you have a viewpoint on that?
Well, we've held all three. I found when I've gone to the UK, I've been in libraries in Croydon and in Brighton. My family comes, and they seem to have very good records there. And I would head there to the local library first if I were going back to England. We have used the newspaper morgue. We did. My wife did a book on the anniversary of the high school in Petrolia, and we used the paper from the Advertiser Topic going back through there, and they are I think are in the archives of Lambton County. I think it depends on, I guess, and this I did the digitized ones through the ink. I probably would look through the ink first or the digitized and see what I can find. But I see Windsor Library has them. I think it just depends on your experience. I guess I can't suggest any better than that. Sorry.
Okay, this is Linda. I just wanted to say, we've talked about ink and we've talked about newspapers.com, but there is also Google News Archives. I used that for a long time, mainly because it's free. And I was able to get a lot of the local newspapers. They've been digitized. Some of them are a lot more recent than the ones in ink. So if you can't find it in ink, you might want to check Google News Archives. And just remember that the Windsor Star wasn't called the Windsor Star until, I don't know, 59 or 30, whatever. It used to be called the Border City Stars. It used to be called the Daily Windsor Star or the Windsor Star. So if you don't put daily in your search, that you might not find the newspaper. So there are lots of places online to look. And like you said, the library does have all of the newspapers on microfilm.
Yeah, I think basically I would start with the digital ones first, and if they're not digitized, then you have to go looking somewhere else, to the local library, the local archive. If the newspaper is still in business, like the Post is not in business anymore, then you could go there too.
Do you know if the Leamington, other than at the library, like since the newspaper isn't in print anymore, where would their archives be?
I don't know, to be honest. I suppose Essex County Archives. Does Essex County have an archive?
Well, the libraries do, the University of
Yeah.
Windsor does, but I'm not sure what they have.
Yeah.
I guess it's just whatever's at the Windsor Public Library for the local papers anyway, for sure.
Yeah.
But Leamington Library may have them. Other Essex County libraries certainly may have them.
Yeah, they may have them. Croydon had them in microfilm, and Brighton had the actual papers. So I went, and those were in the libraries. So, and as I said, we had the actual papers when we did research with the Petrolia topic, and I used the digital papers through the ink for this presentation. I would start with the digital ones first, I think, and hopefully go from there.
So Pat, are there any more questions?
Linda, it's Cindy. Could we ask all the speakers to turn their cameras back on, and yourself?
There we are.
Just nice to see them at the end.
Sure. Hi.
Just a couple of comments. Barb says, very interesting presentation. Deborah says, wow, all three talks have given me a chance to remember memories of different parts of my family history. What is there? Oh yes, and that was a very good point. I hope people picked up on about news being sent back to the hometown even after people leave. So that, you know, you may find information about your family long after they're gone from that location. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, just a note for Kara, suggesting that you search for, or have you joined Facebook groups in Poland, which might be able to help with translations.
That's a good idea.
Facebook is a great resource for family history connections. Okay, that's all the comments and questions I have, Linda.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I just want to thank all of our presenters, Stephanie, Kara, and David, for offering us their family history findings. It's been so interesting and very informative and so well organized. I can say that this has been a great success. So we're going to have to call out to other Essex researchers to let us know if they want to participate at our next members medley. So till then, though, we'll see you in April. Join us when Deborah Honor gives us her presentation. Till then, good night, everybody. Have a good rest of the month.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.